Today, we're going to unpack the political worldview of Wyoming Congresswoman Harriet Hageman. We're drawing from a really in-depth interview she recently gave to distill her diagnosis of what's wrong with America and, just as importantly, her plan to fix it.
So how exactly does a rancher from Wyoming take down a political powerhouse like Liz Cheney? And what's her endgame for Washington? To really get that, you have to start with her journey to Congress, because for her, that journey is everything.
You see, to get a handle on Hageman's politics, you first have to understand just how deep her roots in Wyoming go. It's that connection to her state that fuels what she sees as a massive betrayal by the person who held her seat before her. Right off the bat, Hageman grounds her entire identity in this quote. She's not just from Wyoming, she's a product of its history, its ranching culture. This becomes her core credential, and it's something she uses to draw a really sharp contrast with her predecessor, Liz Cheney. And this timeline, wow, it really shows just how dramatic that shift was. Hageman starts out as a Cheney supporter back in 2016, thinking they're on the same team. But over the next few years, she grows completely disillusioned. She starts seeing Cheney as, in her words, a swamp creature who cared more about Virginia, where she lived, than about Wyoming. But the real breaking point, according to Hageman, was a phone call in November 2020. She claims Cheney actually threatened to have her disbarred just for questioning the election. For Hageman, that was it. That moment lit the fire for her campaign, which, as we know, ended with her ousting a political giant. So, that victory in Wyoming, that was really just the opening shot in a much bigger war. At the absolute center of Hageman's diagnosis of America's problems is an enemy she calls the administrative state.
Now for Hageman, this isn't just about red tape or government being slow. No, she sees it as a kind of hidden fourth branch of government where the real power is. Think about it. Faceless, unelected bureaucrats and agencies making thousands of rules that have the force of law, completely bypassing the people you actually vote for. In her view, that's the system that's choking American freedom and business.
And she puts a number on it, a huge number, $2.1 trillion. She calls this a hidden tax that's being levied on the entire economy every single year, crushing industries that are the lifeblood of her state, like energy and agriculture. This table really gets to the heart of her whole argument. Look at this. On one side, you have Congress, the people we elect, passing maybe 150 laws a year. On the other, you have these agencies churning out over 3,000 major regulations. And she says the head of the snake is a single EPA decision from 2009 called the endangerment finding. She argues that one agency finding became the legal justification for basically all modern climate policy. EV mandates, shutting down coal plants, all of it happening without Congress ever passing a specific law to do it.
Okay, so beyond the bureaucracy, Hageman describes a system that she believes is fundamentally rigged. And this goes for everything, from how we vote to how justice is served.
When it comes to the 2020 election, she's very direct. She uses the word rigged, and she builds a case for it. She points to the $500 million from Mark Zuckerberg, which she says was essentially agency capture, private money flowing into county clerks' offices, dictating how they should run their elections. She also makes another point, that a decades-old court order preventing Republican poll watchers in certain places had just expired. So for the first time, she says, they could legally be there, and what they saw, in her words, exposed all kinds of shenanigans.
This idea of a rigged system extends to justice. For her, the core constitutional principle of equal protection under the law has been totally abandoned. She draws this stark contrast. On one hand, the summer of 2020, which she describes as weeks of attacks on federal property, resulting in billions in damages with, in her view, almost no accountability. And on the other hand, January 6th, where she claims grandmothers just walking through the Capitol got prosecuted and others received sentences decades long. Not as justice, she says, but as retribution.
And then she makes this claim, which is, well, it's explosive. She directly states that USAID, a U.S. government agency, was actually funding groups like Antifa and BLM. She says the money was funneled through various non-governmental organizations, or NGOs. For her, this is a stunning example of the government itself working against the country's best interests.
Her view on the border crisis also hinges on a very specific distinction in terms. She separates what she sees as traditional, legal immigration, where smaller numbers of people come to assimilate, from what she calls mass migration. She defines this as something entirely different, a huge, organized movement of people who aren't trying to join American culture, but to create their own separate communities. And she believes the ultimate goal of this is to intentionally collapse the system.
So, with that diagnosis of a broken and rigged system, what's the solution? Well, let's take a look at the counteroffensive that she's fighting for.
Her strategy is really a three-pronged attack. Step 1 is political. You have to win at the ballot box, just like she did against Cheney. Step 2 is legal. Don't wait until after an election to complain. Sue before the election to challenge the rules and, as she says, make it hard to cheat. And step 3 is administrative. Once in power, use the executive branch to systematically identify and then defund the government programs you see as wasteful or unconstitutional.
And here's a concrete piece of her plan. She's introduced a bill called the Censorship Accountability Act. The whole idea is to create real, personal, financial consequences for any federal bureaucrat who's found to have violated a citizen's First Amendment free speech rights. In her mind, that's how you break up what she calls the censorship industrial complex, by making the people involved personally accountable. And finally, Hageman frames this entire battle in really stark, almost existential terms. For her, this isn't just politics as usual, it's a fight for the future of the country itself. At the end of the day, she doesn't believe that the policies of the last few years have been policy failures or simple mistakes. She argues it was all done on purpose. She even calls President Biden a vessel, implying that he and the people really in charge were deliberately trying to tear down America's core systems. So what's the big takeaway? For Hageman, it all comes back to a single principle. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Her core belief is that the fight begins with just showing people what's really going on behind the scenes. Whether it's agency overreach or where tax dollars are going, she's convinced that if you just expose these systems, the American people will rise up and demand change. And that really leaves us with the fundamental question at the heart of her entire worldview and the movement she's a part of. Is the goal here to fix a broken system? Or is the system so corrupt that the only real solution is to tear it down and replace it altogether?